Are we in store for a bunch of blowouts or are there upsets looming? Let's talk college football playoff. Let's get Bill Bender here from the Sporting News. Always enjoy the conversation with Bill here each and every Wednesday. Bill, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you. And now we've got our field of 12. The best 12 teams in the country, well, that's debatable. 12 teams that earned it. I'm going to check that box. I don't know where you stand.
Yeah, I do. I think the committee did not set a bad precedent. That's kind of the way I've put it all week. By putting SMU in, they managed to validate the ACC regular season and validate this format. Now, you don't have to agree with everything about it. You could say out loud and be right that, hey, Alabama would beat SMU head to head. That might be true. But Alabama also lost to Oklahoma by 3 touchdowns on the road and lost to Vanderbilt. And, Mark, they're trying to throw this argument about, well, we're going to change the way we schedule. Well, really not, because your losses were in your conference. You can do whatever you want with your non-conference schedule. Michigan did that last year. It was East Carolina, Bowling Green, and UNLV. And nobody in Ann Arbor complained at the end of the year. They may have complained had they lost one or two conference games. So I like the 12-team field, and we can get into it. I don't like that it's not seeded properly, and that's my biggest issue with this format right now.
And that seems to be the issue that a lot of people have because they're looking at Boise State, Arizona State, and then the trickle down effect of it impacting teams like Penn State to the positive, Oregon to the negative. And I don't know exactly how to fix that. I've heard some proposals. They sound reasonable. I would like to see this play out. In terms of the Big 12 and the ACC being doormats, I would like to see that actually play out. I want to see the games played. Of course, we can't expect as a league that the ACC and the Big 12 are going to have the results that the Big 10 and the SEC are, because 7-3 just doesn't add up. And it's almost like something you're very familiar with, and I used to be, would be the NCAA tournament.
Yes.
That if you've got a league with 7 teams in it, if 3 of them are fairly high seeds and they bust in the first round, but you advance 2 or 3 to the Sweet 16 and further, then the most of the national fan base forgets that the league faltered in a few spots, as long as a couple teams really rise to the top.
Correct. And well, I mean, the easiest fix for me is just seed it how you rank them. You can still do the automatic berths. If they did it that way, you'd have Oregon number 1, winner of 8-9 games, Indiana, Boise State. That actually looks like a basketball tournament 8-9 game, honestly. Number 4, Penn State, winner 5-12, Notre Dame, Clemson. Number 2, Georgia, winner. Tennessee 7, SMU 10. Number 3, Texas, winner. Ohio State 6, Arizona State 11. That bracket looks perfect to me. Like, in terms of fairness, in terms of, we could quibble about, okay, why did Penn State get the bye week? If you want to throw Notre Dame in the 5 or Tech, or somebody else in the 5, the 6 seed, in that format, go right ahead, Ohio State. But it looks better. It looks cleaner. It looks more competitive. It rewards Oregon a little more. A matchup against Indiana and Boise State, again, as opposed to a matchup against Tennessee or Ohio State, which will be a very high difficulty game for the Ducks in the quarterfinal round, no matter who wins in Columbus next weekend.
Bill, I cannot promise this is the last time I will say this, but it doesn't seem to be making much of a stir. And I understand Ohio State certainly let down against Michigan and carved their own path. But to make the Ohio State-Penn State comparison, to me, seems to be a 3-pronged argument in the Buckeyes' favor. Number 1, the head-to-head win on the road. We can go through the game and how close or not so close it was. Number 2, a much better performance against Oregon. Penn State was kind of hanging on by a thread. It was competitive. It was fun. It was high scoring, interesting, but it was always 1 to 2 scores versus what Ohio State did, which was actually 1 second more on the clock. They kick a field goal and probably win the game. And then number 3, not Penn State's issue or fault, but they didn't play Indiana. Ohio State plays the next best team in the conference, and they win by 23 points.
Yeah, I struggled with that one on Saturday night. I put together our final college football playoff bracket field, and really the hardest part was seeding 5 through 8. How would they stack up Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, and Ohio State? And I stacked it up a little bit differently. Mine was Texas 5. I was still okay with that. I had Notre Dame 6, which I'm okay with. 11-1, that's fine. So far, so good. I had Ohio State 7, Penn State 8, and Ohio State did have the head-to-head victory. And Ohio State was 2-1 against top 5 teams. And Penn State, we have the extra data point, but they lost to Oregon. So yeah, there was 992 yards in that game. It was a shootout. It was an odd game to watch, but at the end of the day, Oregon always had them at arm's length. So but I understand what the committee did. What they did was say, you know what, we're going to put Texas and Penn State 5 and 6 so we can show that the conference championship game has some extra value. That's exactly what they did. And honestly, I'm okay with it in some ways because the way I had mine situated was you were going to get an Ohio State-Indiana rematch. Favorable for Ohio State, yes. I don't want to watch that game again. I don't, and I think the committee designed some things that way to prevent those, and they got their way.
Bill Bender's here from the Sporting News breaking down the college football playoff. Of course, we are just about 10 days away, so we don't have a whole lot of time to wait around, which is nice, as opposed to what the postseason's been in college football in the past. So, Bill, when you look at the matchups, what's kind of interesting is that Vegas judges all these games to be roughly the same separation between the two teams. They're all in that touchdown favorite area.
Yeah, that's not great. In order for this to work, we need compelling first round games. That's why March Madness works, is that you can say I had Bucknell or I had St. Peter's. I'm trying to think who else knocked off some teams. I had Ohio University, of course, whenever we're in the tournament. I'm worried about that. I'm worried that these games aren't going to be competitive in the first round, that, Texas just beats Clemson by 20 points, or Penn State takes care of SMU, Ohio State, Tennessee. That should be a good game. But I still, you're still sending Nico Iamaleava, I had to get that right, to the shoe where, outside my door right now, it is snowing. So it's going to be cold up here. And then, I think Indiana Notre Dame could be competitive or could be a blowout. If they are blowouts, we're going to sit here and say, well, why did we play these games? Why did I take my Saturday to watch these games? This would be the common fan talking. And the easy answer is, why don't we just do 8 teams? Because the second round games will be great. Well, we could have probably just done 8 teams. And again, if you look at those pairings by the rankings, if we just cut this thing off at 8 anyway, the cutoff point is Indiana at 8, or you could put Boise State at 8 and call it a day. And then you leave out, well, I guess you're leaving out Arizona State there. I don't love that. But point being, there's probably 6 to 8 teams that can win the national title anyway. So we're literally doing this for TV. I am excited to see these games on campus, though. I am excited to see what the environment at the shoe is going to be like, with Tennessee coming in there, an SEC team, primetime game, all those things. Notre Dame, Indiana should be fun. So I just hope the games are good, because if they're not, then it's not. I don't think it's fair to compare it to March Madness, because I don't think it'll feel like that anyway.
Yeah, and it didn't necessarily turn out this way completely, but what I was anticipating and leading into this model was we were going to have a lot of a couple compelling first round games that were between teams that I wouldn't have necessarily considered to be national championship contenders, but like second tier Big Ten and SEC teams, like a Penn State from the past, a Tennessee and what they've been the last few years, as being like, oh, this is a fun game. This is a really interesting game to see these teams with NFL players, but they really don't look like national championship contenders. But it'll be a good game, and the winner will go on, probably lose 2 touchdowns by against Georgia or somebody.
I think the cutoff point I'm struggling with, Mark, of how many teams are actually national championship caliber. I mean, we just ranked the teams 1 to 12 at Sporting News, which we do every year. It's the ranking a little bit different than the actual CFP rankings, but I would say Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State. That's 5, and then like 2 then you get into like the three teams that could make a run, but I don't think they could win it. And that's Penn State, Tennessee, Arizona State. I don't think anybody 9 through 12 in this format can win it. Which is what my point. Like if you did the 8 team with that, Arizona State can make a run. Certainly, they're playing really good. I don't love that they're at the Peach Bowl because whoever they play is going to be much closer to home. Penn State has the most favorable draw. That's another thing that's not going to sit well with people. That we're pretending like SMU is going to beat them, which they'd have to play very well at Happy Valley to go up there and win. And then they're playing Boise State, and we're pretending like Boise State's going to beat Penn State. I don't think that's going to happen either. So the Nittany Lions, as a 6th seed, are going to have the most favorable draw to the playoff, to the semifinals. And we're all going to be scratching our heads like, how did that happen? So, I mean, that's why you've got to seed this thing properly in the future, because I think people are smart. College football fans are smart. The NFL doesn't do their playoff format perfect either, but it's much cleaner than this.
Now, Bill, at any point in the past, had Ohio State had a home playoff game, its fan base and the team collectively, there would have been this thought that this is an overwhelming home field advantage to be at the Shoe, especially that time of year. There almost seems, just based on one game, and I'm going into an Ohio State show right after this, we'll kind of serve up does this Michigan game, is that a complete aberration that just doesn't even matter? Or is that a telling sign of where this team is between the ears? And would it have been better to just go on the road and play carefree and get away from all of that, or to step back out onto that field, which of course the last remembrance of that stadium was not a good one. And then if they get behind by a touchdown or 10 points in the first half, it may not be the best atmosphere.
Well, I think the defense will be fine. And that goes a long way in the playoff. When you have the number one scoring defense, the defense didn't play bad against Michigan. I think they allowed one play really where they wrapped up Mullins, and it, we don't have to go through that again. The offense would be my concern in this game, because let's say Ohio State wins the toss, goes out there, 3 and out, James Pierce sack on 3rd down. You're going to hear all the grumbling in the crowd, and you can feel, like I was telling you a couple weeks ago, you could feel the anxiety in that stadium. And on one hand, it really could. They are the boom or bust team to me, because the boom is, yes, this team's absolutely capable of winning a national championship. Their defense is amazing. There isn't a dominant team in this field. And when they're on with the receivers and the running game and the play calling, they're really tough to beat. The bust is the Michigan hangover is real. They don't play well in the first round. Tennessee knocks them off, and we're talking about Ryan Day's future not only right after the game, but all the way in all off season, all through. And I live here. I know every day, every lacrosse practice I go to, the dads are going to be talking about Ryan Day, and what's next for Ryan Day. But if they win a couple games, all that goes away. So they are, without a doubt, the most intriguing team in this field, because they're the only one, I believe, that, well, Clemson lost their rivalry game too, but Clemson won the conference championship. So they, like, Dabo's getting a little bit of a pass. Those two teams lost their rivalry game, but Ohio State, I mean, we all know. We don't have to revisit what happened, but that has put a tremendous amount of pressure on what goes down on December 21st.
Bill, I've long since thought that the run through Wisconsin, Alabama, and Oregon at the conclusion of 2014 was one of the great runs to a national championship in history. And obviously the first team that had to go through 2 playoff teams, the 2 top 3 teams in the country to close it out. But man, when you size up what Ohio State would have to go through, and some of the other teams, of course, but most of them, it would only be a 3-game situation that we consider to be huge contenders and serious contenders for this. It's just the gauntlet seems overwhelming, but obviously they're just going to knock them out one at a time if they are able to do so.
Right. I'll have to say, I think you start with, so what would their path be? I'm trying. I got it right here.
I think it's Tennessee, Oregon,
then Oregon, and then you'd be in the semis versus
Texas, most likely.
Texas. It'd be kind of cool if that was Arizona State, but Texas, that'd be a tough game. And throughout the process of these playoffs, I've kind of pitted Ohio State. They were for most of the year in our championship game in our bowl projections, and at one point we had them against Georgia. At another point we had them against Texas. At another point we had them against Notre Dame. Never had them against Oregon. That's one thing I kind of felt that they would be on the same side of the bracket as Oregon, because they weren't going to do a championship game for that rematch. They would prefer to have it where they have it. It's a little early for that rematch if it happens, but that's a tough one. I mean, again, but Ohio State's the type of team, and I think the other one's Notre Dame, and I'll explain that in a second. The two, if you were when you fill out your March Madness bracket, I know you have, I'll ask you this first, then I'll get to my point. When you filled it out, whenever you fill it out every year, don't you come across like 3 or 4 games that you're like, I got to get this one right? That one's going to determine the bracket, like a Purdue, Tennessee, or last year, I think that was the one, Purdue, Tennessee. You had to get that one right. Or there's a Sweet 16. You're like, this will turn the bracket. Ohio State, Oregon, if that rematch happens, that'll turn your bracket. And I think Notre Dame, Georgia is the other one, because I do think Notre Dame's going to win it against Indiana. Georgia with the quarterback question. Notre Dame with the question of, can you beat an SEC team in this spot? Those are the 2 games to me that will determine who plays in the national championship.
As I alluded to off the top, Bill, it's a bit unfair to the Big 12 and the ACC, especially the Big 12, of course, with one participant, that everything's riding on Arizona State, and they're holding up the credibility of the entire league if they lose a second round game by 28 points. Then the Big 12 is complete garbage, of course. But especially the way they won that Big 12 championship game, in which the most balanced competitive league actually turned out to be the least competitive championship game, which was a bit of a surprise to me. But Arizona State emerges. So what do you think is reasonable to expect from these 2 conferences, the ACC and the Big 12? Just if they play 4-quarter games, if they're within a score in the 4th quarter, that, okay, they have legitimized their selection.
Yeah, I mean, just be competitive. I mean, for Arizona State, I look at them, I think they got a chance to win one for sure. The way they've played the back half of the season with the running back Cam Scadaboo, Sam Levitt playing well. They won their last 6 games by an average of 18 points per game, but it's also a team that lost to Cincinnati. I think the ACC teams come to focus in the first round because they do have to play on the road. They did get that at-large bid over Alabama. There's going to be a lot of people in Columbia, South Carolina, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Oxford, Mississippi hate watching SMU. There's no doubt. If Penn State's beating them by 20 at halftime, there's going to be a lot of, we should have been here, but they're not. And then for Clemson, their playoff credentials have been questioned for a couple years now. Since I really think the tenor of their program changed after Ohio State beat them in that Sugar Bowl in 2020. And they really haven't been that same heavyweight since. So it's a chance to flex against Texas. And I do think they'll compete in that game. I just don't know if they'll be able to run the ball against the Longhorns, and that's going to add up. And, you look at Clemson's losses, they gave up, I think, around 197 yards rushing a game in their 3 losses. So if Texas can get a running game going, that's going to be a long night for the Tigers. But yeah, they have to compete because they say they say it's a blank canvas from year to year, but we all have memories. Like, we all watch these games and we project that into next year, and that's absolutely going to happen.
Bill Bender from the Sporting News breaking down the CFP with us. We enjoy talking to Bill each and every week. Catch his work at the Sporting News. And before we let you go, Bill, I always find these type of situations fascinating when, if you just rewind a year or 2, they would have seemed completely unfathomable. And Bill Belichick interviewing at the University of North Carolina, just back when he's, 3-4 years ago, competing for Super Bowl championships, just to think, okay, Bill Belichick could be coaching a mid to higher level ACC team in a few years just seemed unbelievable. I've not really been following it. It seems like he's negotiating all sorts of different family stipulations for one thing. It'll be interesting to see how that one turns out.
Yeah, we had this discussion in our editorial meeting yesterday, and I was kind of saying, well, yeah, if I'm a college player, I would want to play for Bill Belichick. The comparison I made was It's a dated one, but Bill Walsh was Stanford after he left the 49ers, and he can't, he tried the booth at NBC, got out of the booth, went to Stanford. You look at that 92 team. I mean, it's incredible. They played like 7 ranked teams. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Penn State in the Blockbuster Bowl. And then year 2 and year 3 didn't go well. So I think if Belichick takes this job, it's not like a long-term thing. You would have to accept that. Maybe it's a 3-4 year deal. I don't know if his son will be involved. I do know that it would make college football that much more interesting. Look, we didn't think we would have Deion Sanders for more than 2 years, and they're coming off a 9-3 year. I think when you have characters in college football, it's a good thing. I don't know, like all that you're seeing all the memes and the jokes about how he would deal with 16-year-old kids and 17-year-old kids. Well, maybe that's what 16-year-old kids and 17-year-old kids need. And, his credentials aren't bad. So I think it would be awesome if he came to the college game. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if this was a ruse just to kind of pump up his NFL stock and try to get him an NFL job. But it's certainly going to be entertaining if he comes to the college football game.
The aspect of it that bucks the trend would be that coming off of Mac Brown, another elderly citizen who obviously stepped on campus and made the program immediately better from the 5-win Larry Fedora final 2 years. But I know I expected more. It looked like that they were headed toward elite status in the ACC, and then they just kind of leveled off, and then they started to decline, and it was 8-5 basically is what Mac Brown was. That they turn around, and usually there's a hard pivot to another direction. If you got a defensive coach, you go offense, or if you've got an older guy, then you go, oh no, we need the next hotshot guy that's elevating from the group of 5. But they would have stayed in that same path, of course, if Belichick is the guy.
Right. Yeah, and that's really interesting to me. And there's also how it's hard for me to judge how a really good NFL coach or a really good college coach makes the transition. Some guys can, obviously Urban didn't make it well. Nick Saban was just okay in the NFL. If that, Spurrier did not make the transition well. And then the other way is like guys like Pete Carroll did, and Jim Harbaugh did, and Jimmy Johnson did, and Barry Switzer did. And the common characteristic those guys have that maybe Belichick doesn't is they're either kind of players coaches or eccentric coaches. Jimmy Johnson, big personality. Pete Carroll, same. Jim Harbaugh, same, right? And they make it work both ways. Belichick's obviously a unique personality, a one-of-a-kind personality with how he would – I just didn't really buy he won't be able to relate with players. Yeah, he'll find a way to do it his way, but the results speak for themselves. I was like, if I was him recruiting, I would just come in and wear. How many did he win? 6? I don't know, 6, 7. I mean, whatever, however many.
No, Brady was 7, so it must have been 6 with Belichick. Yeah,
6 with Belichick and 2 with the Giants, I think. So just come in wearing all your Super Bowl rings, and you'll be all right.
And for as much as we've talked about coaches that are able to later in their careers flash national championship rings, Saban, Meyer, etc., to a lot of these kids growing up, maybe they didn't watch college football. Maybe they just watched the NFL, and to flash Super Bowl rings, that's kind of at another level. Wow. Yeah, I think that would work well.
I agree. And again, we're open-minded and want to see things like that. Now, if he just ends up the coach of he won't, hopefully doesn't go like the Giants next year, I wouldn't be any more surprised than I would if he was on North Carolina's sideline. I think he wants to get back in the game and coach. And whether it's, I remember Steve Spurrier coaching at South Carolina late, and it felt like this is kind of like delaying retirement, but he still won a lot of football games.
Absolutely, he did. Bill Bender, Sporting News. Check out Bill's work right there. You see the X handle and also there at Sporting News. Bill, we always appreciate you stopping by. It's always a great discussion.
Hey, thank you.